Well, hi there, it's Matthew Blades, and welcome to another episode of Learn From People Who Lived It. Real quick, before we get into today's episode, which sadly affects 42% of all Arizona women and 33% of all Arizona men, I want to tell you that the dream for me has always been to provide you with some quality resource partners. And I am so happy to let you know that we have officially onboarded about a handful of great folks who can help you in the next step to your healing journey, whatever that looks like. I'm going to tell you about the few that we have on board right now in just a second, but then encourage you to go to learnfrompleplewholivedit.com and hit that resources tab to connect with any one of them. We'll do that, and then we'll get to today's podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. So almost every week of my life for the last 2 years, somebody will ask me about the retreat that changed my life. And I'm so proud to present Spirit Quest as one of our official resource partners. Founded in 2007, it's the holistic wellness center that changed my life, helped me overcome anxiety, helped me work through conflict, gave me all these tools to manage stress, and they would love to do the same thing for you. To connect to Spirit Quest, click the link on our resources tab at learnfrompleplewholivedit.com, and when you get on the phone with them, make sure you mention that you heard it on Learn From People Who Lived It. You've probably heard me say this before, but most of the things that kill us are preventable, and that's exactly why I put my heart in his hands, in his care. I'm talking about Dr. Robert Todd Hurst and Health-Span MD. He's my cardiologist because I appreciate his holistic approach to heart health. There's nothing out there like Health-Span MD. His AFib reversal program, his CAD reversal program. Get the link on the resources page at learnfrompleplewholivedit.com. At Metal Joe, they sell more than shirts. They sell apparel with a purpose. In fact, my favorite hoodie in my closet is a Mental Joe hoodie. They help out G.I. Joes to the average Joes one t-shirt at a time. With every purchase, you help them support organizations that can provide services to help others get out of their heads and into their bodies through plant medicines, equine therapy, yoga, and other non-traditional mental health treatments. Link to them. Pick out your favorite t-shirt or hoodie right now at learnfrompleplewholivedit.com/resources. One of our proud resource partners is Eric's House. Here's the deal. Nothing quite prepares us for the heartache of a profound loss. And grief isn't a problem to be fixed, but rather a normal reaction to loss. So when somebody you love dies, it might feel like everything you once knew is true has changed. When we experience that loss, especially the ones that are really unexpected, like suicide or addiction, grief is complicated. That's where the community at Eric's House comes in. Link to them on the resources page at learnfrompleplewholivedit.com.
Find Learn From People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn From People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn From People Who Lived It.
Hi, my name is Caryn Lewis. I'm 50 years old, and I'm here to share a story about an experience that I went through in my life regarding emotional abuse, another form of domestic violence.
Who do you hope hears this story?
I hope any woman that has gone through this or is going through this now, or man, hears this story and gets something from it, from my experience, and hopefully gets the help that they need if they're in the situation now or if they're still experiencing PTSD.
Okay, so we've got a big show coming up. Hi there. It is Matthew Blades with Dr. David Lycan, and the two of us are together today. Yeah. Very nice of our mutual friend, well, one of my friends, now one of your friends, Joe McMahon's let us use her office today, and so we get to kind of hang out together, which is new for us, and visit with you today, Caryn. And what's interesting about your story, and so many times we talk about this, Dr. Dave, it's like when you're going through a thing, it's pretty easy to feel like you're the only person going through the thing. But the statistics just they don't match that. 1 in 4 women will experience some form of domestic violence in her life. So what you've gone through, many other women and men have gone through. And what you get to do today is to help them learn from someone who's lived it. And maybe you can help somebody else prevent a few twists and turns and, come out of this thing the other way. So Caryn, first up, welcome to our podcast. How are you feeling right now as we get started in the recording process?
I'm feeling more at ease than I was getting ready up to this episode. Thank you for being so kind, and you have put me at ease, and I appreciate the things that you have said to me.
Yeah. Well, we're getting ready to go down a difficult road, right? We're getting ready to relive some moments that aren't so fun, and all in the effort and the spirits that somebody might learn something and take it away. Dr. David Lycan, when it comes to domestic violence, it is something that we think about so much as it regards to women, but men experience it too.
Sure.
Yeah. And in your case, Caryn, it was a lot of verbal abuse, and that's where people get a little tripped up, right? Like everybody thinks domestic violence is physical, but the verbal component, if you ask me, might be worse. It might be worse. And so, all right, let's get back in here. We usually start with the first 10 years of everybody's life, just to kind of set a little framework for who you are, what you're all about, how it started, how you got to where you are now. So I know you told me in a letter that you had a pretty charmed childhood. I don't think you used that word charm, but you said you had a pretty decent childhood. So walk us through that. What was it like 0 to 10 for you, Caryn?
So my parents were, they met in kindergarten. They dated in junior high, and then they courted through high school. They were high school sweethearts, and they were from a small town in Arizona called Superior, Arizona. And they both got married, and they had my sister, who's 4 years older than me. And then I came next. And we had a wonderful childhood. It was always a lot of games, a lot of laughs, a lot of dancing, music. My parents always were able to provide for us. We never went without. My sister and I always had clothes. They tried to get us, the new things when they could. We had a lot of friends. Just love the Tempe area where we grew up. And so there was nothing, there's normal bumps in your childhood, but I would say I had a pretty great one.
Yeah. And so I'm going to go to the doc really quick, because what a contrast, right, to what we usually hear on this podcast. Usually the first 10 years of people's lives is nothing but chaos.
Chaotic, traumatic.
Yeah. So when you hear somebody say, I had a pretty good childhood, what do you think about?
Well, that's kind of the foundation for future relationships. If you have good modeling from your parents, you have some sense of, what a normal relationship would look like, and how you should be treated and how you should get along with other people. So those early relationships really set the foundation for future relationships. Yeah.
So for you, Caryn, then if the first 10 are pretty good, when do you start to notice that something isn't right? And I know one of the things you wrote to us about that we really connected on, and one of the reasons we wanted to get you on our podcast, was because of these two words, self-esteem. Like, you started to have some self-esteem issues. So where do you think some of that stuff started to bubble up and come from for you?
I would say it started in elementary school. I needed glasses. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I needed glasses, and my parents got me those glasses that transition to sunglasses when the sun is out. And I was made fun of so many times because of those glasses. And I wasn't really overweight. It was just those glasses. I think that, I remember being called names all the time. Also, the time I was growing up, I don't know if it was for this way for you guys, but I was really smart, and being smart was not cool until you got to high school or college. Right. And you were known as a nerd and a geek. So you put those two things together, and it was just a lot of, bullying.
I too experienced bullying, a lot of it. 3rd grade, it kind of started for me. I had this kid that used to pick on me. By 4th grade, he was chasing me home from the bus stop. By 5th grade, I had to fight him in the middle of the street just to get him to back off. And then it picked back up again in 7th grade. So I'm acutely familiar with the bullying and how that can play out in people's heads. I don't know what we could say to kids to get them to be less mean, Dr. Dave, in those situations, but it doesn't seem like being smart and wearing glasses should be the means to go ahead and attack somebody, right?
I mean, the problem is kids key in on anything that's different, and then they pick at it. So if you're the smartest kid in class, you're going to get picked on. If you are different in any way, you're going to get picked on. And I know that there's a lot of campaigns in school to try to get people to not bully, but a lot of it comes from kids' own insecurities. And, if they're not feeling completely secure, the way that they're trying to establish themselves is by taking everybody else down a peg or two.
Did you ever reach out to teachers or parents and try to get some of this stuff to chill out?
I was scared. The major bullying happened in junior high, and I finally confided in my sister what was going on, because there was this one gal that she literally would threaten to beat me up if I didn't let her cheat off of my paper. And my sister told me to tell my parents, but I never did. I was just so afraid. I don't know why. My parents never made me feel like I couldn't tell them something, but my mom was an educator. And so I think she felt like anything that I told her, she would go straight to other educators. And then it would come back to fall on me, like, you told your mother, so it didn't go over well, if that makes sense.
I want to know from you, Dr. Dave, if you can answer this question. Maybe you can't, so I'm kind of throwing you on the spot. But when somebody's bullied as a young kid, what are some of the ways that's going to manifest and show up for them later in life?
Well, just from what Caryn was saying here, what struck me is, okay, if I tell somebody about it, they're going to go and get the authorities involved, and then it's going to be worse for me, right? Because you have to still go back to school. You have to still see these people, right? So now you've not only addressed the issue, you've drawn attention to it in a way that just kind of makes it more intense.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I'm bullied as a kid.
Right.
How is that going to show itself later in life? Like in terms of how she acts towards people, how she receives everything.
Caryn, would you consider yourself a shy kid when you were younger?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because I think with these types of things, it's a combination of the experiences that you have, plus like your natural personality. If you're more of an outgoing and aggressive person, you're going to push back on it, right? So you'll take so much bullying, and then there'll have to be a line that's drawn, and you'll push back on it. But if you tend to be kind of shy, you're a kind person, you don't like confrontation, you're in a spot because you can try to avoid the situation, but then they come and seek you out, and then they're the ones that are bringing the confrontation. And so as much as you try to avoid it, there's really no place to hide from it. And then
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And if that becomes then the pattern, at some point you have to learn how to set boundaries, because that's the lesson to learn from childhood that becomes very important as an adult later on, is being able to set boundaries. And that could be boundaries in relationships, boundaries at work, being able to speak up for yourself to get a raise, parenting, being able to set limits with your kids, right? So learning how to set those boundaries is the lesson that you want to take away from childhood. And the bullying thing, if it pushes you into more avoidant patterns, then that becomes a problem. Then later on, the avoidant patterns become the thing that gets you straying, with adult relationships.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that. What were you going to say, Caryn?
I was a shy child, and then over time I'm outgoing, and now as an adult I'm pushing back more, I'm setting boundaries more, but that took me many years to learn those skills.
Yeah. Well, isn't it interesting? And here I learned from people who lived it. The reason you're here is to talk about the toughest thing in your life and how you've come out of it. And so to me, it doesn't surprise me, I guess I should say, that later on in life, you entered into relationships where you were bullied again in a different way, but you entered into relationships where people pushed you around. They said negative things to you. They told you things about you that probably weren't true. When did you get into your first relationship where abuse was part of the equation?
I would say it's the second marriage. So that was 2004.
Help us understand what's going on in your life around that time. You just obviously gotten out of one marriage, and now you're entering the second one. So what's going on for you?
So what happened after my first marriage was my first husband cheated on me. And so there was this feeling that, I wasn't enough. Again, like the self-esteem issues came back. What I didn't realize at the time was I really did not want to be a single parent. I really didn't want to own my own home. I kept telling people that's what I wanted, but it's not what I wanted. I really wanted that, it's that codependent person. I wanted somebody there. And so my goal was to just find that person. And so the first person that showed me any interest happened to be a really bad person, right? And so I just latched on it and tried to make it work. And then I started getting so sucked into it that I never felt like I could leave at a certain point, because then the thoughts of, okay, now I'm going to be a 2-time loser, started to come to my mind. Like, I can't get divorced twice, so it's just wanting to be with somebody, it's that feeling like I just have to be with somebody. I can't be alone.
Yeah, that's the line that got me, Caryn. When Caryn wrote to us, I mean, the one line she had was, she said, I went through a lot of counseling. I had to figure out why I could not be alone, why I ignored the red flags, why could I not stand up for myself and learn to say no? And I was like, we have got to get her on the podcast to talk about this, because I am in my own head right now thinking of 3 or 4 women that I know who could write that same sentence and could say that exact same thing. And so how interesting, and maybe let's spend a little bit of time talking about this. It's like, so you get into that relationship, because people from the outside, like I used to do a lot of work with the Sojourner Center. And so I was around domestic violence survivors a lot. And and just so everybody's listening right now, the worst thing you can say to somebody who's in a domestic violence situation is, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just get out? Oh, what's wrong? Why don't you just walk away? It's like, it's not that easy. There's a million things at play here. And so obviously abuse doesn't start on day one. There's a buildup, there's a ramp up. And so how would you compare the relationship with this second husband of yours in like the first 90 days or the first 6 months versus the next 6 months? Like, can you help our audience understand that slow build I'm talking about?
So there's like in the new part of the relationship, there's the red flags aren't quite there yet, because there's a lot of presence, there's a lot of compliments, there's a lot of attention. And I think one of the first things that happened maybe 2 months into the relationship, he had a rental, and I was at his house and a delivery was being made, and it was for a coffee table. And so he said he didn't have any money on him, and he asked if I could front him the money. And so I was a little reluctant, because it was $500. And so I said, sure. And he said, I'll pay you back right away. And so he did. He did pay me back like a week later. And so that was a good test, right? I had one good test of, okay, he asked to borrow money and he paid me back. But then little did I know, the money trail, like, and the trust of that would start to, go down. Like he would use that against me later.
How so? How does he use it against you?
So he would he took a credit card out in my name without my knowledge. And so he was buying me presents on this credit card that he took out in my name. And he would say to me, I paid you back this last time, so I'm good for it. And then he also said that he had these, I don't know what they were, investments or something that he had for his children, but he just didn't want to have to liquidate that. And so it was kind of like a thing to keep me strung along, like to keep giving him money and help, because he made me feel like he's got this pot of gold that he could liquidate when he needs to. And so finally, at some point, I said, okay, it's time to liquidate one of them, because I need my money back. And then he would get angry and upset because he would then say, like, that's for my child's education and I can't do that. And well, come to find out later, there was no pot of gold. He just made the whole thing up.
Right, so the way that comes across to me is that, you took it as a test to see if he was trustworthy, but he was taking it as a test to see how far he could push you.
Mm-hmm.
So does that keep going? Does that sequence keep happening? And then, yeah.
It did until, finally, like, I think I did. I bought a car with him. He needed a car because he had to sell his car. He told me, he had to sell his car because I forget why. It was like a Mercedes, but really he just needed the cash. And then he couldn't get another card because he didn't have any credit. And then he convinced me to co-sign with him on this new car that he needed. And so I did that. And then all of a sudden now I'm in the hole with him with several things and financially connected to him. So I'm worried, right? Like, now I'm kind of stuck with him and I feel stuck with him, knowing that it's going to be more difficult to leave.
I think that's
go ahead.
That's the dilemma with these types of relationships too, is you have time and an emotional investment in the relationship. And maybe you had been dating for a while before and it took a while to find somebody that you connected with. And, so there are some positive things early on in the relationship and you kind of feel like you're in it to a certain degree, that when some of these negative things start popping up, it can sometimes be difficult to step away from it if you don't have a very clear boundary in your mind to say, okay, this is unacceptable. I'm just not going to do it. A lot of times the calculation is, well, we've done so much together and we have things in common, and there are good times and things that times that we enjoy each other's company, and so you're kind of weighing one against the other. But if somebody is sociopathic and they're abusive and they're deliberately trying to manipulate, that can pull you in deeper than just naturally if it wasn't a healthy relationship, but somebody wasn't being manipulative with it.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, Caryn. One of them is with regards to like sex and intimacy. So you guys had like this volatility and the screaming, and then there's these money battles that are going on, but were you guys close? Did you enjoy being around him when that piece of it wasn't there?
We did. And that piece of the relationship was good.
Yeah.
And so that's why it was, I guess, hard, right? When the bad things happened, because I knew, that there was also this good part. But honestly, I think I was really afraid of my friends and my parents finding out like how much financial debt that I had gotten into with him. And I was just really scared and worried about people finding out about that.
Yeah, I want to talk about that for a little while, but first I want to ask and give our audience an opportunity to learn from you, Caryn. Hindsight's 2020. You've had a lot of time to look back on that specific relationship now. Why do you think you were unable to put up stronger boundaries then? And why do you think you couldn't put yourself in a position to say, this is wrong, we fix it, or this relationship doesn't keep moving forward? What have you learned?
I have learned that it's better to be by yourself than in a dysfunctional relationship. That took a long time to learn. It's almost like society, everything is couples and, everything is together and two, right? And I felt like I was seeing all my friends and family happily married. And And it was just really hard to think of myself doing everything on my own. And so I stayed, even though I was miserable.
Because but you knew it, right? Like, I think that's worth noting. I mean, even these really bad relationships, they have a comfort factor. Like, you know what you're getting into. You kind of know what to expect. You learn how this is going to shake out. And there is some comfort in that. But, and you and I should have this conversation, Dr. Dave, about that lethal trap that she's in. Right? Like she's sitting there, she's going, oh, I can't do this because people are going to think this, and I can't do this because they're going to think this. And then, but then that kind of forces her to stay in the position. And what she has to do is just get over the fact of what people think.
Right. Yeah. There's two things that jumped out at me. One is fear and the other is shame. So the fear part is, how am I going to make it financially? How am I going to manage all these things that I need to with a house and a car and all this, without somebody else there to kind of help buffer things? That's kind of the codependency part, but it's really fear driven, and fear can be a very powerful driver. But the problem is, if you're running from something, you're not necessarily moving in a healthy direction, right? So if you were walking down the street and somebody jumped out at you to try to mug you, and you just start running to get away from that person, you could be running into a worse situation. You don't know. You're just trying to get away from the thing that's bad, right? So it's a much better situation to be in, to like have a very clear direction of where you're going and to be moving towards something positive than to be running away from something that's a negative.
Yeah.
But that fear part can be a very strong driver, and it doesn't always take you to healthy places. And then the other part, the shame part, if you're making a decision because of external factors, how people are going to perceive it. And a lot of times we build it up in our own minds, like they're going to, people are going to perceive this very negatively, or they're going to, have a very strong opinion. And in reality, a lot of times people don't feel very strongly about it, and you're your worst critic.
Did you feel like people on the outside fully understood the magnitude of what was happening on the inside, Caryn?
I think my parents knew something was going on. My sister and brother-in-law knew something was going on. I don't think they knew the extent. I don't think any friends knew. I didn't share a lot with my friends. He tried to isolate me, like, let's move. Everybody in my family and friends lived on the east side of the valley. He wanted to move us to the west side. He wanted, he wanted me to move out of state. And I at least stood up for myself from that perspective, because my son's dad lived on the east side, and I did not want to lose the support of my parents in case I needed help with my son. And so I was able to at least stand up for that and say, no, I want to stay on this side of town. And I pushed back on that. But he would also use words to me to make me feel bad. If, I would say anything regarding trying to leave, he would say things like, you're going to have to, walk slowly back to mommy and daddy for help. Mm-hmm. So those tried to make me feel the shame, right? Of, if that's what you need to do, see how shameful you're going to be. And when I did actually leave him, and he said that to me again, I said, I'm so glad that I have my parents to help me, and you don't.
So let's talk about that courage day where you muster up finally the courage to step out of that relationship. Was it easier than you thought? Harder than you thought?
It was easier than I thought. It was kind of a strange day. I was thinking about this last night, actually, because I don't think I had remembered it when I was first writing out my notes for this. So we had sold something on eBay, and he was looking for the item and making sure it was shipped. And I'd forgotten to do it, or, whatever. I was working and a mom. And he started getting really upset and yelling at me, like, why didn't you ship this yet? And I said, I'm sorry, I totally forgot about it. And so yelling, screaming, my son is there. He gets us all in the car to go to the post office. And I remember the car ride, like back and forth, like he was just yelling the entire time. And I remember as he was yelling, I remember thinking, this is it, I'm done. Like my son is in the back listening to all of this. And this is just like horrible. He was a truck driver, and I knew he was leaving out on a trip the next day. And so I thought, okay, I have to do it tomorrow. And so I just sat there and I took everything. I made it through the evening, and the next morning he left. And the first person I called was his aunt. His aunt she's still around. I still keep in contact with her. She's an amazing person. She doesn't have anything to do with him. And I told her what was going on. And she said, I'm going to call your sister. And I said, no, I'm going to call my sister. And I did. I called my sister, and my sister screamed excitement and said, I am coming over right now. We are going to pack up a few things and we are going to mom and dad's. And I said, what? I said, what? She said, I'll be over in 20 minutes.
So she was happy for you.
Extremely. And I love my sister. We're still very close. I just, I've never seen like my sister, like react that fast, and it was amazing. Like she came over. My son was so excited. I felt so bad. Like my son was like, he was like, oh, thank God, like this huge burden had gone over, been pulled from him. And we just packed up a few things in the car and we went over to my mom and dad's. And my mom and dad, they were great. They were glad to have me there. My dad, not many people in this world could have this support, right? I was very lucky. Some women have to go to a shelter. I was able to go to my mom and dad's house. And my dad said to me, you can live here. You guys are welcome. I will help you. We will figure this out. He says, I only have one condition. And I said, what's that? You cannot go back to him. And then my dad said, if you go back to him, you and I are done. And that's not what I want to do. He's like, I don't want to disown you, but he goes, you and I both know you can't go back to him. And to this day, like that is the best thing that my dad ever did to me, because my ex, he really, really tried to get me back. And I think knowing that my dad and that I would lose my core family, right? My beautiful, wonderful family that I had grew up with, I just couldn't lose them. Nope, I could not go back to him and give my family up.
Yeah. Is it so worth articulating that everything you thought was going to happen didn't? And it was like the completely, like this 180, beautiful, arms wide open, everybody welcoming you in, nothing but love.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about going through a situation like that, is you really think like everybody's going to think this, everybody's going to think that. And none of them thought that. They actually had the opposite reaction. Yeah. So that must have given you, like really some courage to kind of keep stepping that direction, right?
It did. And, I started counseling. So I was able to have a great conversation with my parents. My mom passed away in 2019. And so I like knowing that like I got to resolve this with her. And, I said to my parents, like, you just think I'm a disappointment and I've made all these mistakes and I'm not perfect. And like, you guys had this perfect, relationship and got married and, now I'm this 2-time loser. And my dad said, I love you. I love my grandson. And I am so proud of you and the career that you have kept and have. Do I like the choices you've made in men? No. And And I was just flabbergasted. So all the things that I thought that they felt, they didn't.
There's a couple of things that jump out at me with this. One is how expensive secrets are, right? Emotionally and time-wise. You're trying to keep something from yourself. You're trying to keep something, the reality of the situation from other people that are around you. And the amount of effort that it takes and the emotional toll that it takes is huge. And, in this story, I can hear like what a relief it was to finally just put it out on the table and come clean and just say, okay, this is reality. It's not the reality that I wanted, but this is where I am. And that catharsis that goes along with that is the first step toward healing. I think that's a big part of it.
I thought you said there were two things that jumped out.
Yeah, there was another thing. See, I always do better when I'm remote because there's something about the live feed that I think throws me off.
Hey, you're just fine, man. You're just fine. You're doing great. Don't even worry about it. Okay, so what happens after this relationship? You get some counseling. I'm guessing you start to feel pretty good about yourself, your situation. I don't know, I'm making assumptions here, but maybe you get your own place. You kind of get back on your feet. You start moving in a direction. Is that kind of how this plays out?
Yeah. So before I did all that, I actually started reading books, and I found a book about a woman that she had lost her whole family like in a car crash, and she was going through loss. And then I was reading how like she, went through all these things with loss and got counseling. And then, this woman started a nonprofit, and she's, doing like a half marathon. And it just was an eye opener to me that, I don't have the market cornered on loss. And there are people that, have different kinds of losses, and they're difficult, and they get help, and they find the tools to help them get through it, and they somehow, make something of it. And so it inspired me to, in my life, to start like volunteering more and helping out with more organizations. And I'm still like kind of working on that, now, just because it's hard to, balance with life. But there's something more that I think is meant for me, and so Mathew, your journey like has always spoke to me. And so I think there's something, for me down the road that I'm going to discover.
Yeah, well, and maybe this is a piece of it, right? You know how I feel. I feel very strongly that the only reason things happen for us is so that we can help other people when it's their turn. And, one of the things that you wrote in your notes to us, and I'm just going to read this to everybody listening, but she says, as an emotionally abused woman, I can tell you, I never thought I was the victim of domestic violence. I did not have physical bruises on me or my son. I often remember telling myself, he hasn't hit me, so it isn't that bad. But it was. It was draining. It was condescending. It was emotional torture day in and day out. There was humiliation, shame, social isolation, financial abuse, manipulation tactics. I was waiting for the other pin to drop. It was like waiting for a live mine to explode. I never called the police. I never went to a shelter. And it's so interesting to me because you think it's got to be one thing, but at the end of the day, if it isn't working for you, that's the flag to get out. And maybe you've stepped into a little bit of that understanding that it doesn't have to be all of those things. If it doesn't feel good for you, then it's the wrong situation. And what did you learn through your counselor? I'm curious about like what your counseling sessions gave you in terms of tools or strategies, or what were they able to provide for you?
Well, I mean, it was addressing a lot of the issues that I myself had with my parents, which was all made up in my head, right? About being perfect, about having this life that I needed to succeed at everything and then not succeeding, so forcing it to try to work. It was about trying to be, comfortable in my own skin and learning how to be alone, and that, learning how to say no, when there is a red flag, acknowledge it, it was those type of things, after a while, I think I lived with my parents for like about 2.5 years. It was a while. They were very generous, but it was enough so that I could save money and buy a house. And I bought my own house, and it was the best feeling in the world. And I remember when I started dating again at first, there were definitely some red flag guys, and it just felt so good to say no.
How did you learn to be alone? That's such a great thing to talk about. And because so many people need it. What was it for you? What did you put into your life that filled that void? How did you learn to be alone?
I had to learn to, owning a house, right? Like I was navigating that by myself. Like I was trying to, figure out things. But then I was asking people, like my sister or my parents, like, hey, this is going on. What should I do? I also had a girlfriend. She's still in my life. She was a, how do I say this? Like she lived a very long time alone before she got married. And so she would travel a lot. And so that was one thing that I experienced as well, just to see how that would work. And I now have this thing where I really like to travel alone, but then I meet somebody like at a destination. So I haven't gotten to the part where I just actually do like a trip by myself, but there is something about like, getting on an airplane and just being by yourself that I really like.
And can I ask you, did you discover that right away, or did it take some moments of discovery?
No, it took some moments of discovery. It took a while to definitely to be comfortable in my skin, because I could initially, like after the counseling, I think I started to see the cycle start again. Like there were, I'm not going to lie, there were a couple of guys and I was like, oh, this is going to work. And then I could tell, no, like stop. And so then I made myself wait a very long time before I actually started dating again.
Yeah. And I asked that question for a specific reason, Dr. David, because so many people, they like try one thing and they're like, well, I tried it. It didn't work. Well, you know what I mean? They try the things. Well, that didn't work either. And so screw it. I'm just going to get back to the way that it was. How do you work with, patients and people to try to usher them in that direction of starting the discovery of, well, what do you like? What are you all about?
This whole thing is a process.
Yeah.
So getting back out and dating again, and then kind of seeing things going in the wrong way, at least if you catch it before you get married, before you move in together, before you get a bank account together, right? You start to see the signs earlier on. Maybe you've gone on a few too many dates before you realize it, but you can still get out of it before there's too much harm done, right? That's part of the learning and growing process. You don't just shake off codependency and then get into a healthy relationship.
But if you have bad self-esteem, you'll try something one time and you'll say, it doesn't work. I don't deserve it. I should just stop trying, right? Like you can see where that happens for people all the time.
Sure, but you can't do that.
Yeah, of course. If you want to move out and get through the other side, right? Yeah.
You have to allow yourself to fail, but fail sooner and fail before you have too much of a loss, right? Yeah. But accept that failure is part of the process of growth. You have to try things, and a lot of times they're not going to work out, and that's fine. You can learn something from that experience and then put that to use later on. Just the fact that you saw red flags when you started dating after this second relationship, you saw the red flags and they registered with you. So now you're on alert, and then you see, maybe the second time that something happens on a date or whatever, it's like, okay, this is not going the way I want. That recognition, that ability to see it sooner, and then the confidence then to say, okay, this is not for me. I've done this before. I've been down this road before. I know where this takes me, and this is not for me, and to be able to get out of it. So that's part of the growth process. And then the other part is being okay with being by yourself, right? So codependency is by definition that when you make decisions, you're intermingled with somebody else. You're looking for that validation. You're looking for that confirmation from other people before having the confidence to just go ahead and do it. That also takes time, and you have to shake some degree of perfectionism and be willing to accept minor failures and be okay with it. Have it not take a huge hit on your self-esteem. And again, that's a process. That's not something that people come to immediately.
Yeah. Well, the reason that I asked you both that and I kind of pressed on that is because I want to really, really drive home that point that you're going to have to try some things. You know, as you're getting out of one situation and stepping into another, you're going to have to try on a few things. And the first one might not fit. The second one might not fit. But when you feel like a failure already, and then you fail at something new, it's like the compound fracture, right? And so it just feels like it adds on it. But I love what Dr. Dave just said. Trust that that's part of the process. Trust that as long as you're failing upward, right? As long as you're failing forward, and you're learning from your mistakes, your reaction times are getting a little bit quicker and better. Like you're on. Trust that you're on the right path. And I'm going to guess that. Well, you said you lived at your mom and dad for a couple of years, so you took your time to sort of rebuild yourself. And in your notes to us, you say you're married again. You found somebody. You've been with him for 4 years. And I'm going to guess that this relationship looks nothing like the first two.
It doesn't. We actually dated for over 7 years before we got married.
His doing or yours?
It was a combination of, we both wanted to be, he wanted to be better financially secure, and I honored that, you know. And so, and then there was we were both coming from previous relationships. And so, you know, it's funny because if you had asked me at the time, I would have said it was too long. But now that we're in this great marriage, now I'm like, I'm glad we took as long as we did. So, I mean, I hate to admit that to him.
But you guys built up a nice foundation.
Yeah, you built a foundation.
Yeah.
That's exactly the word I was thinking.
Yeah.
We did. Yeah. And we became really good friends. And we spent a lot of time going through life hardships, right? That's the other thing that I think people need to do. Like you go through like somebody dying or somebody getting sick or a financial situation or a job loss, you know, you see how that person reacts. Like when those things happen, my mom she had Alzheimer's, and she started exhibiting a lot of problems and issues into our relationship. And, you know, my husband, he was amazing. You know, like anytime I wanted my parents over to help them, absolutely, what do you want to do was his answer, you know? So it's almost like you need to ask yourself before you get married to somebody, this is my opinion, is this the person I want sitting next to me if I hear I have cancer?
And this gentleman is that person. Why? What does he represent? What kind of attributes are present with him?
He's kind. He's caring. He's smart. He's my cheerleader. He's always been my cheerleader. I'm his cheerleader. He's taught me a lot of things about communication as well. I think I'm a better communicator in my profession because of him. What else? He's just a good person. We laugh. That's another thing that I didn't realize I needed until I just really started laughing and having fun with him. And it was somebody like one of the first person that I think that got me and my quirky personality.
So you're saying there's somebody out there for everybody?
I think there is.
I think there is too.
My wife's grandmother used to say there's a lid for every pot.
Yeah, there's a lid for every pot, right? It's so true. And I have this expression I love, which is you can't heal in a war zone, right? And so as long as you're still in all of the bad stuff, it's going to be really, really difficult to come out of it. But you took yourself out of the situation. You were brave enough, courageous enough, all the things to finally stand up for yourself and do what was right for Caryn. And then boom, look at you. Now you're flourishing. Would you say that you've grown as a person, as a human being in this new relationship?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, I want to make one more comment about the trying things. You also have to try different counselors, not because
So happy
I've
you said
known,
that.
I've known people that will get a counselor and they say, well, it didn't work. Well, sometimes it's not the best fit for you, and that's okay. And you keep trying and you get another counselor. And I've had to do that a couple of times. Then you find one that works for you and you stick with them. And, I'm going to share that I'm in counseling now, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think sometimes we need tweaks, we need like check-in tune-up sessions. And, this past May, the world got a little crazy for me. I got really sick. My dad was in the hospital and work was just really insane. And it felt like things were out of control a little bit. And so I started counseling, and it's really helping, like just to have someone to talk to say like, how do I set these boundaries, or how do I say no at work, or, how do I do this, and it's really important, I think, that you have other cheerleaders in your life.
Yeah. And don't you think any good therapist, Dr. Dave, if you came to them and said, I don't think this is a fit, any good therapist would say, yeah, let me help you try to find somebody who feels better for you.
That's how it should be.
Well, that's what I mean. If you're a good therapist, that's going to be your reaction to it. Like, and if you're around somebody and they're like, well, I don't know, hold on a second. Well, I'm now going to be in that other chair going, wait. Are we here for you, or are we here for me?
Right.
And so I think if you're around a good therapist, they're going to help you find the care that they know you deserve and need.
That's something that has to be worked through in therapy. Because sometimes when somebody says, oh, I want another therapist, it's maybe because the therapist is pushing them to go places that they feel like they're not ready to go to.
That's fair. That's fair.
They don't want to put the work in, or there's some hesitation there, and kind of working through that hesitation is part of the therapy. The things that are holding you up are part of the reasons why you're there to begin with. But sometimes it's just not a good fit, personality wise,
life experience,
not connecting. And, you have to figure out when to pull the plug and try something different. This is a dilemma that I've had for as long as I've been in the field. You don't know what you need when you're looking for somebody. If you haven't been in therapy before, you don't know what you need from a therapist. And I don't have a good answer for how to figure that out.
Other than trial and error, other than visiting with somebody, seeing if there's a vibe, and if there's not, moving on.
Yeah. And I think you can set certain parameters that, there should be goals in therapy, and you should feel like you're being heard by the therapist. If you feel like you're being talked over and rushed out the door, then it's not a good fit.
Yeah. Is there like one thing that you've taken from therapy that you just love, Caryn? Because I've got a few nuggets from my therapy over the years that I'm like, oh, there's a few nuggets that I just make sure I tell everybody. Is there one thing, or a sequence of things, or a thought process that they've helped you understand that's been so helpful for you?
I can't really think of anything off the top of my head other than that they help me think through my thoughts and how I'm feeling. And they sometimes put my thoughts into, like, they know exactly like what it is that I'm feeling. And they help me put that into a thought that I'll get, you know what I mean? A lesson. And so sometimes things are jumbled up and you don't, why am I feeling this way? Or why, is this going on? And they help you frame your thoughts. Another thing I like is some of the resources, with like books or movies. Like my counselor that I have now, I was telling her my nervousness and hesitation about doing this podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she recommended this show on Netflix called Made. She was a little worried that it would bring up a lot of the trauma, but I ended up binge watching it. And at the end of it, I was crying because that's when I realized I suffered domestic violence. Like the woman in this story was emotionally abused, and she kept saying in the story, well, I don't need to go to a shelter because I haven't been hit. And they kept telling her, you belong here. You belong here. And that's when I realized, like, okay, I feel like I've processed this, and I have for the most part, but I don't know, maybe just like my son who had to process it at a different point in his life, maybe as you grow and as you develop as an adult too, maybe you still need to like reprocess some things. And that's why I don't think counseling is a bad thing. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, I just think it's imperative. I mean, every one of us goes to the doctor when we get a cold or the flu or something like that. And we all need to be doing the same thing. Others almost every day. In fact, today I was driving up the 101, and I'm pretty sure that 99% of the people on the 101 need counseling. There's a lot of rage out there, and there's, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people need to work some things out, talk it out, figure some things out. I want to ask you about your son. You just mentioned it before. Clearly he grew up and he saw some things that you wish he wouldn't have seen, but what kind of man is he going to grow up to be because of that situation too? Like, I got to imagine there's some really positive things that are going to come out of that.
Yeah, I think so. We have a very close relationship. He and I, he forced me to look at the things that I made him do, like go through, I guess. Like I felt really bad about that for the longest time. And, I had to forgive myself, and, he's forgiven me. But he really just wanted to talk and understand why I thought I was in a good relationship. And so those are like the things that him and I have worked through. But, he's just, what I know about my son is that he's the kindest person. He's so good to the core. And I really like that he's got that part of me. He's, how old is he? 23, 24. I can't believe it. And he's 23. And he's just an amazing kid. My niece and nephew are also great young adults. And I think that's just because of that, that core that my mom and dad set. And I think he's going to be a good father when that day comes for him.
All right. I have one last question. Anything from you, Dave, before we start to wrap up a little bit?
When we were talking about therapy, it occurred to me, good therapy should be like holding up a mirror. So the therapist should be reflecting back to you the things that you're saying, helping you to identify patterns. And that's where the insight comes from. I think we're all guilty of living life on autopilot to a large degree, and our reactions to things and the decisions that we make are largely automatic. And you need some mechanism to stop and pause and kind of see what's happening and be able to get a little distance from it so you can see the patterns in a broader way and be able to take a look at what's happening so that you have an opportunity to change it next time. If you never see the pattern, you never have a opportunity to change. Right. And so good therapy should be like holding up that mirror and saying, this is what I'm hearing you say. Does this fit? Am I getting it correctly? And then when you agree with that, and it's like, yeah, that's pretty much what I'm saying. You have a chance to then chew on that and see the patterns in it and see if there's anything that you would want to do differently then.
Have you noticed any patterns for yourself, Caryn?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I know there's, I don't know if this is relevant, but I still sometimes cringe, like when I know I've messed up or done something wrong. And that pattern I'm trying to break, right? Because I feel like it's, even though the relationship was not super long, it did enough damage to that way. If I screw up, I feel like all hell's going to break loose. But my husband has been really good at like helping me, work through that. So that way, I know like nothing bad is going to happen.
Right. And I would say that pattern will probably always be there to some extent. What gets better over time is your ability to recognize it quickly and then have a counter narrative in mind saying, wait a second, I'm having all this anxiety about this, but I've been through this before and I know how it plays out. And I know I have good support. And I know that there are people that love and care about me. It's not going to be a disaster. It's not going to be this huge thing, and then you can kind of take a deep breath and calm yourself down and then move forward with it and not feel like you have to avoid the situation.
Caryn, my final question for you is, let's just end with this. Close your eyes, do whatever you have to do, but just imagine somebody is sitting in their car right now listening to this podcast. Maybe they're sitting at home. I don't know what people do when they listen to this podcast, but they're there right now and they're here because they connect to your story and they're in that relationship right now that you had to leave, that you had to walk away from, and they just haven't found the courage to do it for themselves yet. What do you want to say to them? I
would say just tell one person close to you that you trust. Tell them your secret. And I promise you won't get those judgments back. Just take a leap of faith and tell one person in your life what's going on.
Because that'll start a sequence of events, right?
It will.
Yeah. I'm so happy you came on and decided to share your story with us today, Caryn. That's like it's legitimately the hero's journey, right? We always think about that word hero and what does it look like? There's everyday heroes that just muster up finally the courage and the self-worth and the value and all of the things that we talk about on this podcast to say, like, I'm going to stand up for myself and I'm going to do what's right for me, my son in your case, and I'm going to put my life back on the tracks because it's not anybody else's job to do that for you. It's your job to put your life back on the tracks. And that's where to me, the hero's journey is, right? Like when you find the courage to put your life back on the tracks. Amen. All right, Caryn, I asked you before we started taping, how you're feeling. Now I'm asking you as we've wrapped up, how are you feeling?
I feel great. I really liked this. Thank you.
Let me say this too, Caryn. When I read your story and your hesitation about doing it was, this doesn't seem like that exciting of a story. This seems like, kind of a ordinary sort of thing. Like that was exactly what I connected with is, you're a regular person going through normal ups and downs, but how you navigated through it is so helpful for other people to kind of see that example and see how you work through some of these things. I can't tell you how many people I've run into in my own practice that are struggling with some of the same problems with relationship difficulties. And so seeing somebody else go through it and come to a good conclusion with it is so helpful, so important for other people.
Thank you. I try to look back on that part of my life. And what I tell myself is I say, thank you, God, that I survived and I wasn't hurt. My son wasn't hurt. And I appreciate the learning experience. Now I know what I need to do.
Yeah. And now I remember the other thing that I wanted to say before.
Oh, great. Now we're done.
So you when you go through traumatic situations, be it big T trauma or little T trauma, you're already hurting. You've already paid your tuition, right? You might as well learn the lesson. You've already bought the class. You might as well learn the lesson that comes with it. And don't waste that pain. Don't waste that experience, but try to get something out of it since you've already paid for it. So there's kind of a practical element to it. And if you're open to it and especially once you've gotten beyond the idea of perfectionism, I can't make mistakes. I have to do everything perfectly. You say, okay, fine. I screwed up. So now what am I going to get out of this? How can I turn this into a positive, and how can I take something out of the situation that I can use for myself, that I can use for my kids, that I can use to help other people? And then all of a sudden now that's not a wasted experience. It becomes something that actually has value for you.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.